Excellent. Okay, so like the first half of this call is going to be taken up with a more sort of presentation style run through of what the academic editor role entails. So myself and my colleague Bex are going to sort of run through what the AE role is and hopefully give you all the information you need to set you up for success in your roles. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, as I mentioned, and a sort of brief closing. And there will be an optional breakout room at the end. So if you're interested in some social time with other editors, we're going to split folks into breakout rooms where you're very welcome to meet other editorial board members from across the PLOS portfolio. As I said, I appreciate that everyone's quite busy, so that is optional. But if you're interested in that, please do stick around. So let's start with some brief intros. I am Hannah Harwood. I'm one of the Journal Development Managers at PLOS, and I work across PLOS Sustainability and Transformation and PLOS Neglected Tropical Diseases. So you may or may not have been in touch with your Journal Development Manager already. Essentially, we're responsible for developing and delivering the strategy for the journals alongside our editors-in-chief. But we also work very closely with our editorial board. So if you haven't come across your Journal Development Manager yet, I'm sure you will. But yeah, great to have you all here. And I'm joined by my colleague Bex Kirk. Bex, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And it's so great to see so many board members who've joined the team over the past year joining us today. I'm the Associate Editorial Director for all of what we in PLOS term the community journals, which are the group of selective field-specific journals that you are a member of the academic editor team for. I also oversee and work with the editors-in-chief on PLOS Medicine and PLOS Biology. And so I have an internal team where I work with there. And on behalf of the journals in my portfolio, I work really closely with the publication ethics team within the organisation to ensure that the policies that you all need in your roles are available to you and are implemented. So I'm originally a biochemist, so I definitely don't cover all of the topics in the portfolio here. And that's why it's so important to have all of your incredible expertise. And it's really exciting to hear more from you.
Brilliant.
And thanks so much.
Thanks, Bex. So I think it would also be really nice to have the opportunity to get to know who from our editorial boards is on the call. So we have a brief poll that I will just hopefully launch correctly. Bear with me. Hopefully this is the right one. So there's a couple of questions here. Please do feel free to fill this out. Just to sort of let us know who's on the board, what journal you work for, give us an idea of sort of geography and career stage. I'll leave it open for sort of maybe a slightly painful 30 seconds to give folks a chance to participate. Excellent. I'll let the last few trickle in. Okay, great. Well, it's great to see so many of you. We've got a good split, lots of folks from PLOS pathogens here. And yeah, lots of a good spread of folks from around the world. So thank you all for joining, whatever time it is, where you are. So let's get into it. So you are on a PLOS editorial board, and sort of, I'm sure you've noticed by now, if you've had a chance to take a look at other editors on your board, we have very broad, intentionally broad coverage in terms of geography, subject area expertise, career stage, to make sure that we're incorporating a lot of diverse perspectives on our journals. So as part of that, we run sort of regular recruitment needs analyses and subsequent recruitment drives to make sure that our boards are healthy, And we've got this broad spread that really taps into lots of different pockets of our research communities that our journals serve. Again, I'm hopefully you will have noticed by now, if you've had the opportunity to dig around and hopefully handle some papers, we have 2 different types of editors across our community journals. So first up, we have section editors, who are the first folks to handle submissions. So when a paper comes in, it's assigned to a section editor, and they have the opportunity to reject a paper without review or invite an academic editor, one of you, to handle the paper. So our section editors tend to have sort of broader subject area knowledge versus sort of the more potentially subject specific expertise of an academic editor. So with that in mind, it's a quick note that it's important to keep your profile in Editorial Manager up to date with your expertise and relevant sort of classifications to that, to make sure that our section editors know what you're about and so that they can find you appropriately. And then we have our academic editors, which is all of you. So as an AE, you will oversee the peer review process, and really are responsible for determining what we should or shouldn't publish in the journals. If you're interested to take a look at your fellow editorial board members, we've linked on this slide, which I believe will be sent out to you after the call. We've linked our editorial board pages. So I will just demonstrate one here. So we have lists of our full editorial boards for each journal on our journal websites, and these are really helpful resources to see who else is on your editorial board. So they're searchable by name, by location, by section or classifications. So they can be really helpful resources if you're looking for other folks on the editorial board. So for example, if I wanted to find all the editors we have in a venom section for PLOS neglected tropical diseases, I could search on here, filter by section, and that would pull up all of the relevant editors for that section. So I'd encourage you to take a look if that's of interest. So is this going to go back to full screen? Yes, okay. So the AE role. So in short, as I'm sure you're aware by now, our academic editors are responsible for overseeing the peer review process from beginning to end. So that will look like conducting an initial assessment. So after you receive a paper from a section editor, assessing the paper based on the journals and PLOS's publication criteria to determine if it's suitable for peer review, and then the sort of standard peer review process, finding and inviting reviewers, evaluating their feedback, and using that to inform your editorial decision, which will then be communicated to the section editor. That's all fairly standard. I think one thing that I would like to call attention to is that, you know, aside from the sort of day-to-day manuscript level process, PLOS AEs are sort of an extension of PLOS, and we'd really encourage you to play an active role in the community and advocate for your journal where possible, sort of being a representative PLOS out of your title. And if ever you would like more information, or I guess resources or thoughts on how you could best do that, your journal development manager, I'm sure, will be very happy to talk to you about that. So feel free to reach out whenever. So just quickly, we wanted to highlight our editorial board code of conduct. So we take publication ethics very seriously here at PLOS, and again, as our editorial board members are an extension of that, we expect our editors to do the same. This shouldn't be new to you. You will have agreed to this as part of your onboarding process. But if you ever want to take another look, review this, all of this information is on our website. And I think that's linked in here. So yeah, on our PLOS, in our PLOS Editor Center, our full code of conduct is listed there if you're interested in taking a look. Again, if you have any questions, happy to chat through anything, but shouldn't be there shouldn't be anything too surprising in there, but it's there if you're interested. Oops. Okay. So now we get to the meat of it, getting started in Editorial Manager. So Editorial Manager is our submission system. Hopefully you've had a chance to go in and take a look at that already. You might have used it with other publishers before. It's pretty broadly used, but EM is the submission system that we use. So when you're starting out as a new AE, what are the first things that you want to do in the system? So there's a section within Editorial Manager where you're able to update your information. It's handily called Update My Information. And sort of through that area of the submission system, you are able to sort of make sure all your contact information is correct, your institution is correctly listed, but also you're able to indicate your areas of expertise. So that's really important for our section editors in being able to identify appropriate AEs to handle papers. So you can add classifications from a sort of set taxonomy that we will have on the journal to note your expertise in your area of specialty. And we also have a sort of free text keyword option where you can add additional words if something isn't explicitly covered in our classifications and you want to add more nuance or anything like that. So I just to briefly demonstrate. So we have a AE Editorial Manager Guide, which is a really useful resource and should really be a sort of one-stop shop for any process-related questions you might have. So again, this is linked and it's accessible from our guidelines for editors part of our website, but I would encourage you to go and have a play as a sort of first port of call if you have any specific questions. It's really helpful and has lots of step-by-step guides and screenshots and things to show you how to do various actions within Editorial Manager. So feel free to, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but just to highlight that you're able to go in and add specific classifications from our taxonomy or add specific keywords to make sure that our section editors know who to invite. Another really important piece up top that I think is really helpful to make you all aware of is to add unavailable dates. Now I think there's a link here. Yes. So if we completely appreciate that AEs aren't available to handle papers 100% of the time, everyone will have busy periods, or you might be going on vacation or have a period of sick leave or be out of the office doing some field work or something and be unable to handle papers during that period. There's a feature within Editorial Manager that lets folks know, let us know that you're not able to handle papers. So by adding unavailable dates to your profile, our section editors can see that you're not going to be around and they'll avoid sending you sort of unnecessary invitations. So that sort of helps you, helps your sort of post-break email mountain by not receiving lots of invitations when you're not going to be able to handle them, but also helps it's in sort of author service in making sure that papers aren't sitting with folks that aren't able to, they're not around to handle them because everybody's busy, of course. But that's incredibly helpful if you get the chance to add those in. So this is a really helpful resource. And again, I can't emphasize enough. I would really encourage you to take a look. It's very comprehensive. So getting into the editorial process itself. So this flowchart just looks at the different stages of the editorial process from submission through to decision. Anything in dark blue is a section editor task, and anything in green is an AE task, so something that would sit with you as an academic editor. So I'm sure none of this is news, but just to run through briefly, when a paper comes in, it will be assigned directly to a section editor who will conduct an initial evaluation and then have the option to reject the paper without review if it sort of clearly doesn't fit the journal's defined scope. or invite an AE to take the paper forward. As an AE, you would agree to handle the manuscript, and then conduct another initial evaluation. So you might decide at that point that the paper isn't suitable for the journal, and might reject the paper without review at that stage, or decide to invite peer reviewers and move ahead with that process. So the peer review process would proceed as standard, inviting peer reviewers, receiving their comments, distilling their feedback into a decision letter, which you would then submit to a section editor to send off to the authors. It's all, that's a fairly standard process, but hopefully all you visual folks out there, this is very helpful. Also, I guess is worth noting additionally to this, our editorial office will also conduct technical checks. So they are looking for things sort of at the submission stage. They'll look for any specific formatting requirements that need to be met, although we don't have very many at this early stage. They'll check for sort of image visibility and figures, look for specific metadata, etc. So there are checks additional to the editorial ones done by the editorial board. Those are sort of happening at the same time. So what to do when you receive your first invitation? So invitations to handle manuscripts will always come through your email. Our section editors are responsible for sending those. And as I said before, they will send those to editors that seem appropriate based on the classifications that they have listed in the system. So emphasizing again that having your classifications and your expertise up to date in the system is really helpful to make sure that for the most part you're receiving invitations that align with your expertise. I will click into here. So we have a series of quick guides on our website that are similar to the big editorial manager guide, but they're distilled into sort of very task specific, like 2-page or few page guides. So we have one on what to do when you receive your first invitation, and contains hopefully an example of what a manuscript invitation looks like. They won't look as busy as this. This one's annotated, so hopefully this isn't too overwhelming. But just to call out a few key pieces that it might be helpful to keep an eye out for. So the subject line will always say what journal the invitations come from, and that it's an invitation to handle the manuscript. Right at the top, there's a list of all of the author names as well as the title. So that should be your first sort of port of call in deciding whether or not the paper looks appropriate at a high level for your expertise, based on the title, and whether the author list is suitable. You can see at that point if you know somebody, if you have a conflict of interest, for example, that can be a quick way to determine whether or not you should be handling a paper. And then just to call attention to 2 links here at the bottom. There is a link to accept the invitation and a link to decline the invitation. So you always have the opportunity to accept or decline an invitation based on your situation. And that's based on a number of things, but you always have the option there. And I would also highlight that I think if you are fairly certain that you can't handle a manuscript, it's outside of your expertise, or you're confident you don't have the time, I would encourage you to decline the invitation rather than letting it sit, if that's possible, because that helps our section editor move on to subsequent invitations and keep the paper moving when that's an option. So moving on to timelines. This looks a bit blurry on my screen, so apologies if this is a little blurred, but hopefully you can still see it and get the gist. So we have put together a sort of very rough timeline based on sort of chunking up different sections of the peer review process with a rough guide for how long ideally parts of these processes should take. I think it's worth acknowledging that This does vary sort of between subject areas and stuff, but I think hopefully this gives you a sort of a working model, I guess, at the outset of ideally how things would move along. So we sort of recommend that an initial valuation takes place within the first few days of receiving manuscript or accepting an invitation to handle a manuscript. And then should you decide, you might decide to reject the paper at that point, but if not, obviously you would then move on to finding and securing peer reviewers. We sort of quote 1 to 2 weeks initially to find those folks and get them to agree. Subsequently then, that should ideally take 2 to 3 weeks for those folks to write their reviews, get them back in and submitted. And then once all the reviews have come in and you have all the comments, we would recommend a further 3 days to take that feedback and distill it and recommend a decision to the section editor. So obviously these would repeat for every revision cycle if you choose to send a revised paper back out for peer review. But hopefully that's helpful and gives you a rough guideline of sort of timelines for things. So I'm going to hand over to Bex now, I believe. So Bex, would you like to drive your own slides if I stop sharing? Yep. Sure. Bex, over to you.
So I hope you can now see my screen. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to many of you who sent in your questions in advance. What I'm going to aim to do, rather than pulling each individual question out, is to answer some of those questions as I go through this sort of deep dive into the editorial process. So what I'm going to do here is, from an editorial standpoint, I've been working as an editor in different journals for about 15 years now. So hopefully I can give a bit of context from what I've learned and experienced that will support you in this particular role here at PLOS. And I'm going to do a deep dive into each of those steps that Hannah highlighted on the timeline. So the first step is thinking about this initial evaluation. And key here is you've been invited and you've accepted this manuscript because it aligns with your subject expertise. So we're really looking for you to use that insight of what you know from your own research, from conference attendance, from your own reading, to really determine if this particular manuscript is of sufficient interest for other people within your field. The journals that we're talking about in this portfolio all are selective for interest and for insight for the community. And so that's something that we're really thinking about as we're looking at this initial assessment. The biggest additional thing that I would highlight is we're asking you to look at this manuscript as an editor and not as a peer reviewer. So when you're making this initial assessment, the expectation isn't that you're going into each technical piece of information and determining whether this research has been conducted in exactly the right way, with all the controls that you might need and everything all tied up with a bow. What you're looking for at this stage is if everything that the authors have conducted has been carried out appropriately, rigorously, with all the right ethical requirements, and it's proven to be correct, is this finding that they're outlining in this manuscript of interest to the community? And if so, then that's the point at which it's a really good idea to send it out to peer review to get that technical insight and the detailed analysis that the peer reviewers will conduct for you. So I'm going to hopefully jump out into our next quick guide, which is the initial evaluation guide. As you can see, this is specific for this group of journals, and that is a really important element because the scope and the publication criteria for each journal is specific to that journal. It's specific to the community's needs that the journal is aiming to meet. And we have a detailed set of things that you can click through here to allow you to familiarise yourself with the publication criteria, with the scope. I would also encourage reading some of the manuscripts in the journal, specifically in the area of your expertise that you will be handling, to get an idea of the type of manuscripts that the journal receives and is able to publish, the level of insight that those manuscripts have been able to offer, and the way that the authors have communicated that research as well. It's really important to note that if a manuscript doesn't meet this criteria and doesn't meet the scope of the journal, and this isn't just, is it in topic area, this does mean also this community insight aspect, it's really your remit to say, this isn't really worth asking peer reviewers to comment. I'm confident in my assessment that this isn't suitable for the journal, and you provide that feedback back to the section editor. In order for the section editor to really take that feedback on board, it's really important to outline why this is the case and why this particular article is not suitable in your view for further assessment at the journal. If you do decide to proceed with peer review, it's really important that this is conducted in an independent way. These peer reviewers need to be independent of you. It's really important that our academic editors don't conduct peer review themselves. You can obviously provide insight to authors, but this is not through the peer review process. Thinking about this type of process, this sort of, as Hannah outlined, this kind of thinking and deciding should usually be conducted over the course of about 3 days. It's also important to note that there are other PLOS journals that may be more suitable for the manuscript that's been sent in. So I would encourage you to familiarise yourself with the scope of related journals within our portfolio, so that if a manuscript isn't insightful enough for your particular journal, it's possible for you to make a recommendation to transfer to another journal. And it's really important to remember that PLOS One is a really great, inclusive, rigorous, interdisciplinary journal that can be offered as a transfer destination for manuscripts that don't suit the journal that was originally submitted to. Thinking about rejecting without review. Obviously, I mentioned before, I'm not expecting you to peer review the manuscript at this stage, but if you notice serious methodological flaws or analytical flaws that would be fatal for the manuscript, you don't have to send this to peer review at that point. You can reject without review. If you think immediately that the conclusions are not supported by the data, not sufficient sample size is one very clear way of determining that, but there are many others in different fields. If it's not a significantly interesting or it's a flawed research question or hypothesis, even if the manuscript then turns out to be completely carefully conducted, the actual outcome is not something that should be published in the journal, and this obviously would be a reject without review decision. If you have sent something back out to review and it comes back to you, one thing that would be something to consider is if you would be interested in it, but only if the authors conducted very substantial changes, needed to create a new mouse model, for example, or needed to recruit new patients into a new trial. This isn't something that is reasonable to be requesting at this point, and it's better to reject without review rather than to set the authors up for future failure. If it's not suitable for a reject without review decision, then that's the point at which it's time to seek out external peer review. And I can return to my slides. And we're on to finding and securing reviewers, which was the question that came up most in the poll before the webinar. So we'll spend a bit of time just going through this. I think it's really important to realise at this stage that any paper that proceeds to acceptance at a PLOS journal must have been externally peer reviewed by independent and non-conflicted external reviewers. So not just assessed by an editor. The suitable reviewers will have expertise in the subject matter, but also quite often we would be looking for methodological expertise or technical expertise. And these folks need to be active in research at the moment and to be unbiased. And we know that shopping list of requirements that I've just outlined can be really challenging to secure. And what we want to do here is to share some of the tips and strategies that other editorial board members have shared with us so that we can set you up for success. As noted by Hannah, all of these activities are conducted within the manuscript tracking system inside Editorial Manager. This is so that we can keep track of everything that is happening. We can support you. There are also a number of really handy features of the system whereby reviewers will be gently reminded that they have not responded to an invitation, and they get reminders when they have accepted an invitation as to when the review is due and what is expected of them as they're doing that assessment. So, as I'm sure you've come to expect, there is another handy quick guide for this. And this is this stage. And we really do hope that this is something that can take 1 to 2 weeks. Sometimes this can be quite a challenging phase of the manuscript. So as we said, we're looking for people who have the relevant expertise, understand the methodology, and are unbiased. And so thinking about what that means, appropriate qualifications and expertise, here's a sort of handy checklist when you're thinking about what does a good reviewer look like. You're expecting somebody to have at least published 5 manuscripts on the topic, not in total in their career, but on this particular area. You would hope that they have expertise in the methodology, and early career researchers can be particularly effective for providing insight into methodology and particular technical expertise. This is where it's probably best for somebody to have a postdoctoral experience level at least. So somebody who's been working in the field for enough time to have done their PhD or medical degree and has come through and is now really working in the area. And we are looking for somebody who is affiliated with an organisation that demonstrates that they are who they say they are, that they have that expertise. So that can be quite a broad area, but we rarely would be expecting a private citizen to be conducting academic peer review for us. It's really important to avoid competing interests and biased perspectives. It's important to check before inviting a peer reviewer that they don't work at the same institution as the authors. Authors can also outline opposed reviewers who might be opposed for many different reasons, and it's important as far as possible to keep to that recommendation and to not invite those people as reviewers. We usually have a 5-year window where if collaboration has occurred outside of that 5-year window between the authors and somebody who might review, that can be fine. However, you know, networks of researchers are complex, and somebody could have left somebody's lab 5 years ago, but they've been their PhD trainer, and that probably is a close relationship. So it is important to think that outside of this checkbox that there is definitely some nuance to this. And the other thing that is actually very easy to overlook is some institutions are very large, but what we don't want is a manuscript that's been peer reviewed by 3 independent reviewers who all have the same affiliation. Although you can find institutes that have amazing strengths in particular fields, it's really important to get some different perspectives when getting this insight from the peer review as to what to do next with the manuscript. So when talking to editors, they generally point out that the first thing that they do when they're thinking about peer reviewers is the people they know. I mean, this definitely comes back to don't invite somebody from all the same institution and not everybody that's down the hall from you. But at the same time, people that you know and that you have worked with and that you have confidence in their recommendations are a really great source of information and advice on papers. Then there's the folks whose research you know, so you've seen them present at a conference or you've read their paper and found it inspiring. This is obviously where this innate community knowledge and research focus of the academic editors team really comes to the fore, because this is where no search engine can replace that kind of insight. That said, search engines can be really powerful. We have some particular ones that are dedicated to searching for peer reviewers. Inside EM, we have the Web of Science reviewer locator tool. So you can click through in EM, and this is in the EM quick guide that Hannah shared before, and you can really go through, and it uses the information within the manuscript to help identify peer reviewers within their tool. And it's a very large database of researchers who the search system think will be of relevance. Obviously, once you have this information, like for any search engine, it's really important to provide your own nuance and decide whether that's thrown up the kind of people that you're looking for or not. There are obviously other databases that we all use in our day-to-day research: PubMed, Google Scholar, Web of Science, Dimensions. Any of your favorite place to find research is another really great place to find people who do that research. And as you're doing this, the one thing I would just refer you back to again is it's so important to think about that competing interests. We really don't want to be in a situation where we've invited a direct competitor to assess a manuscript, but also not somebody who's somebody's best friend from school. So you need to try to balance that information. So thinking again about a bit more about some of those tips that have come through over the years. As I noted before, early career researchers can have incredible insights, in particular when it comes to how the research is conducted and the methodological information, but also just they're reading around a lot and they're thinking about next steps in their career, and they can be really well versed in the community and the field. And they do tend to have more time and more enthusiasm to see the manuscripts before they're published, so that they can give that insight, and it's part of a development for them as well. If you know somebody or you're inviting somebody for a particular reason, say we were talking before about you've seen somebody's work at a conference and it connects through to this manuscript in a particular reason. Sometimes it's not obvious from the title or from the abstract why something is in a particular person's area of expertise and why you've invited them. So highlighting that you're particularly interested because you know that they've worked in an adjacent area in a different organism, for example, but you're really interested in the way that they thought about that research question and it aligns with the particular research that you're looking to peer review. Explain that to the person in the invite. You know, certainly when I'm on the receiving end of peer review invitations, if someone explains to me why they think my insight is going to be useful, it's going to make me much more likely to say yes. We also encourage and allow co-reviewing. So if you invite somebody who's very experienced and you know that they're going to be busy, you can also note that this is something where you know that they've got a large lab. If there's someone within their lab they can work with who can provide a co-review that they then get credit for, I think this is a really nice way of bringing that early career researcher through, but having that high level insight into a particular field that someone who's an experienced PI will bring. There is a really nice video in here, particularly for using dimensions to find reviewers, and that really digs into some of the detail, but it's not something we're going to go through in today. Really thinking about those diverse perspectives I was saying before about not just inviting all the people from down the hall. It's really important as you become more experienced as an academic editor to broaden your pool of reviewers and not only invite the people that you know really well. First up, they'll thank you for it, but also we want to be encouraging a diverse set of perspectives on the journals and into the field and the community. And although obviously those in your institution are going to be available, I personally hold on to those folks for the manuscripts that are particularly hard to review, and call in that particular help for those ones, and use some of the other techniques and tools for finding reviewers fast. And there's the databases within Editorial Manager. They are very specific and useful, and you can put more information into them. But it is completely reasonable to use the databases outside of Editorial Manager. Just do be very careful, because you have been shared this information confidentially. So putting large amounts of the manuscript into systems is not something that we would encourage. The abstract is usually fine. There is a bunch of information about actually inviting the reviewers in Editorial Manager. I really would encourage you to watch some of the videos and go through things. But I do think it's sort of as a wrap up to this section, and noting the number of questions that we received about this as well, securing reviewers really can be challenging. We know people are busy, we know you are busy, and those things coming together can make this to be a particular challenging aspect of the role, because you're not in control of whether somebody is willing to or available to peer review. I would really recommend that, because of this, aim to start inviting peer reviewers as soon as possible. Once you really engage with that manuscript and go, yes, this is interesting enough for this journal. If it's correct, I would be keen to see this published. That's the time to start inviting the reviewers. Putting things in Editorial Manager right at that moment when you've been thinking about the manuscript, where you know what type of expertise you would need, and you're already kind of thinking about the type of people who do that work. That's the most time efficient time to really start inviting those reviewers. I would also recommend, if you can, to make a note of the type of expertise that you're looking for in that manuscript. So if you do have to come back to it, you've got that set of notes and that information available to you, so that when you come back to it, you don't have to start from afresh. I would recommend putting around 8 candidates in if you can. Often that's it, and then you don't have to look at it again until the review reports come in. But do check your email. Editorial Manager will give you information about when a reviewer says yes, and also when you need to invite more. So we do have prompts and suggestions and tools that will be flagged to you as part of this via your email. If you're not getting emails from Editorial Manager, you'll miss out on some quite helpful things. So do try to put that as a safe address into your email system if possible. There are some frequently asked questions, but I think that's probably best dug into as you're going through. So I will return back to our friendly slide deck, because at this stage of the process, we've got our reviews. Everything's worked out. We've got our peer reviews, and now what do we do? So I think one thing is really important to note is our peer reviews are a structured form. So this isn't true everywhere. You will see particular things that are important for PLOS policies that are called out. And one of the things is the information and is the data available. And these types of things, we really would be grateful if you look into and provide your additional nuanced expertise, because what we need to have at the end of this whole process is a manuscript that meets all of the PLOS policies, that meets the field requirements, and is interesting for our readers. There are 4 options that you can take at this point once you've got all of these reports back. And I'm going to go through a little bit about what a good decision letter will look like. But I think we've all received those. It's where you have that set of insight where the editor provides you with that additional context. Which of these reviewer comments are absolutely essential to experimentally address? Which can be addressed through textual changes in the manuscript? And sometimes which of the reviewer's requests should be put to one side, because perhaps that's, in an ideal world, that would be in this manuscript, but actually it may be a whole new phase of your studies, and the author really shouldn't be taking account of that in this particular phase of the work. So finishing up with our theme, here's our quick guide. So you've got your 3 or 4 set of comments, and it will come through, and our reviewers will have received all the same guidance. They will have received all the same information. Our policies are flagged to them, and they're encouraged to comment on whether the manuscript adheres to them or not for the particular field-specific questions. But I do think it's really important to notice that a peer review is an opportunity for a conversation. So each reviewer will give their own personal perspective on a particular manuscript. And as the editor, it is your role to contextualize these reviews, pull them together, and to make that decision on the manuscript. What peer review is not is a vote-taking democracy. It's not a case of, oh, 3 people said it was reasonable, 1 person's recommended reject. Well, the 3 win. If the person who's recommended reject has identified a really important flaw in the manuscript that only they are the technical expert to be able to identify, theirs is the most important insight in that particular manuscript, and the decision would have to be reject at that point. So as you're looking through these reviewer reports, it's really important to distill them into the most important aspects of what the reviewer is asking, and then think what's necessary for the authors to address. It's also really important that you don't get involved in editing the reviews themselves. The reviewers have their voice. It's their intellectual property that they're sharing with us, and they have given us permission in due course to publish that within transparent peer review. And so we don't make any changes to the reviews. If there are things within a review that you have concerns about, just get in touch with the journal office and they will support you with any questions. It's important when you're doing your own personal summary and decision that you're really taking into context the reviewer comments and what you know about the research as well. And thinking about, again, I was saying about that reviewer expertise, why did you invite this particular person and what insight is most valuable from them? If I've invited a particular medical statistician, then their comments around the stats are going to be far more important to me than their overall, well, I found this paper interesting or not. That's not really what they were there for. It might be important additional context, but the big thing that I'm interested in is were the statistics properly powered. If you can't make a decision on your own, you have some options. You can ask reviewers for more insight. There is an opportunity to reach out within EM to particular reviewers, but also you can make an initial recommendation to your section editor who can then give you some more nuance. There's also a third option that's not highlighted here, which is to open a discussion within EM with your section editor to say, look, this is a situation. I'm a bit unsure about what decision to take. And your section editor will have overseen many, many, many decisions and will be able to provide much more insight and thoughtful perspective than anybody else. When I say it's not here, it's in the grey box just below, because it's all covered in these quick guides. It's very clever. So as we think now, we've kind of assessed the reviews, we've pulled them together, we've teased out what the most important aspects are, we've thought about what's reasonable and unreasonable to ask an author to do. And then you can think about what type of decision to make. Within our journals, we have 5 options. We have a major revision. Anything that requires any experimental work would always be a major revision, even if it doesn't feel very major, because major revision allows authors 60 days to make their changes. It's also a really important signal as you're putting that you're requiring this additional piece of information, this additional work in order to consider the manuscript further at the journal. I would only expect to render a minor revision when you're looking at those kinds of changes that could reasonably be made by an author within 30 days, and where you really are expecting most likely that this manuscript is going to make it through the next phase. It's sort of a signal of, we're mostly happy with what work you've done. Here are the changes we need to make. see you in a month's time. Except this really is only to be put through when the manuscript is completely scientifically sound and all of the issues that you think need to be addressed have been fully addressed. This doesn't mean that the author has met every single request that a peer reviewer has asked for, but it does mean that you've carefully assessed every single one of those and determined that it's been suitably addressed or didn't need to be addressed, and that it's completely ready to be accepted. Reject and transfer. This is an option for a manuscript that is methodologically sound and the peer reviewers haven't identified any ethical challenges, but where actually the level of insight for the community turned out to not be quite as much as we might have initially thought when we sent it to peer review, and it's maybe more suitable for another journal. And then reject. This is where a manuscript doesn't meet the publication criteria, requires substantial changes, has major issues that would mean that it shouldn't be published in another PLOS journal. This is where that decision would be rendered. And to some degree, we sort of adopt this whole process again when the revised manuscript comes in. But this time you'd be really looking to first interrogate the point-by-point response to the reviewers and check that the authors have made a concerted effort to really address those questions. As you go through that point by point, you're an expert in this field. Can you make the decision as to whether or not the authors have sufficiently addressed the reviewer's points? Or do you need that reviewer, that particular reviewer, to go and have a look and assess the particular questions that they raised to the authors? It's not necessary at this point to always send manuscripts back to all of the reviewers. It's not even necessary if you are able to make that decision to send it back to any reviewers, as long as you are confident that you have the expertise and knowledge for that particular field to be able to assess whether the concerns have been addressed by the authors. If you want to go back to reviewers for further advice, that is absolutely fine. And the system has particular letters that reminds reviewers that they've seen it before and that you're looking for their insight on their original comments and how they've been addressed in the revised manuscript. It's really best practice not to get into a situation where a manuscript goes for more than 2 rounds of revision. Ultimately, if an author can't satisfy you as an editor that they've addressed those points within 2 opportunities for revision, the chances of that coming to a successful end diminishes rapidly. And at that point, we really do need to think about the time commitment from the reviewers and the editors, and also to give the authors an opportunity to find a journal that may be more suited to their particular work and where they can get their manuscript published more efficiently. As Hannah did note, there are technical checks that get conducted, and the technical checks that get conducted on a revised manuscript are more in-depth, and they are looking at things like, has the data availability statement been updated to provide all the information that is required for PLOS? Do we have the required ethical statements? Do we have the information from the IRB properly located within the manuscript? Have the authors provided their competing interest statements in full so that you as an editor can then make sure that you can check them and are confident that there are no issues that you were not aware of? So you will see all these checks get carried out in the background, and you will only get that manuscript back to you once the authors have made their changes in response to your comments and the peer reviewers' comments and have responded to all of those technical additional requirements. At every revision stage and every time you're providing feedback to the authors, it's really important to provide context in the decision letter that you send. We all have different hats in this process. Sometimes we're the editor, sometimes we're the reviewer, and sometimes we're the author. When writing the decision letter, it can be really important to bear in mind how it feels as an author and just think about the kind of constructive feedback that you would appreciate if you were receiving this letter. What's the path forward as an editor that you're looking for, and communicating that as clearly as possible to the authors is really important. your comments and your letters can really give context to the reviews, as I was noting before, outlining what really needs to be addressed, where you're particularly concerned or where you're actually already happy and the reviewers' comments aren't as necessary to be addressed as the reviewers might have thought. And if you do need to make that reject recommendation, highlighting briefly why the manuscript will no longer be considered at the journal is really important. It allows authors to go back, make necessary changes, to think about their next path towards making their research public and what forum that will best take. So here are the sort of overarching expectations of the role. I think it's really important to think that one of the things that's really helpful for authors and for manuscripts is to have that consistent person handling the manuscript from initial decision through to final decision. And so we would expect when you say yes to handling a manuscript that you're going to take it through the whole process if you decide to send it out to review. If you encounter any publication ethics concerns, we have a particular process for that. You can notify PLOS. We have more resources, but there are publication ethics FAQs for editorial board members that really give a lot of information on this. That will link out from these editor resources, so you can go and dig into that. You shouldn't need to read up on that in advance. This is more a case of when you see something that you have some concerns about, there's a lot of information behind it. Probably good to go and just scan through what types of topics can come up so that you're aware of what to look out for. Journal staff can and do support the journal by checking in on decisions to just ensure that we have transparency and high quality feedback. If we have concerns or feedback, we may well get in touch with you and provide you with additional resources to support. It's really important that, as I noted before, authors can opt to publish their peer review history. For PLOS, that includes the letters you write. So really think about how you're communicating and make sure there's nothing confidential in that information, and the language you use is respectful at all times. And reviewers will also receive a copy of your decision letter. So bear that in mind when you're talking about the reviews that need to be considered by the authors or not, because this feedback will also go back to the peer reviewers. And with that, I will hand back to Hannah to round us out. I appreciate we've not got many minutes.
Brilliant, thanks, Bex. I'll just briefly share my screen again. So hopefully that was really helpful. Just I'm going to bring us to a close in the final sort of minute. So everything that we've linked out to from our slides can be found in our guidelines for editors pages. So I will just quickly show you how to find those. They look like this. There's lots of resources. I would encourage you to take a look. You're able to find them on each of the journal websites. If you go to publish, and guidelines for editors are linked here. So I'd encourage you to take a look. Let me bring us back to the slides. So we've also linked here each of the journal contact details for specific manuscript queries. And I've also noted here our editorial board role support contact address. Hopefully this is already helpful, but I would encourage you to go and take a look at those resources in your own time. So given that we're at the hour, we have a Q&A section. Although I would note that looking at a lot of the pre-submitted questions, Bex, you covered a lot of those incredibly well already. So hopefully a lot of those questions have already been answered. There was one question we received about code of conduct. So I will actually just toggle back out here. Apologies. In our, where are we? So we do have a full guide on what does and doesn't constitute a conflict of interest online. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And that should be really helpful. in answering that question, just because we're at time. If you do have any questions, or you have questions on a manuscript by manuscript basis, please do feel free to reach out to your journal inbox and we can give you some additional guidance there. So to bring us to a close, thank you all again for your work as an editor. We're really happy to have you on board, and thank you for your time this morning. Hopefully this has been really informative. But as I say, we have journal inboxes and specific editorial board support contacts. If you have any questions at any time, please do reach out. Feel free to engage with us on social media. So we are on Blue Sky. We have a PLOS account as well as a few journal specific accounts. And you can also find us on LinkedIn. So do give us a follow and engage with us over there. And just, another quick thank you and a reminder that you are an ambassador for PLOS. So we really would encourage you to go out and fly the flag for your journals in your communities, and shout about us where possible. That would be much appreciated. But yes, thank you again for your time, and please do feel free to reach out with any questions. So at this point, unless you have anything to add, Bex, we have the opportunity to break folks out into breakout rooms for social time if you would like it. Of course, this is optional. I will stop sharing my screen. That might also help. So you're welcome to drop off at any point, but if you are interested to sort of stay and get to know other folks on the editorial boards, I'm going to be breaking people up into breakout rooms now. So feel free to stay as long or as short as you like. Thanks again, everyone, and I hope you have a brilliant rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Beck.